Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Chelsea Wolfe, She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She. The weird thing about Chelsea Wolfe albums is that I often appreciate the textural experience of the project, but I'm increasingly left wondering if a stronger chord might be missing. Yes, I still think the haunted dread of Apocalypse is probably still her best, at least for me, and the 1-2 punch of Abyss and especially Hiss Spun can feel viscerally effective if you dig out the horrors within as the mixes got heavier and crushingly bleak. But 2019's Birth of Violence lost me hard, as without a lot of that atmosphere, the weaknesses in writing, composition, and performance start feeling more obvious. But it has been 5 years since a proper solo album. She's done some collabs and soundtrack work in the meantime, so signing to a new label at Loma Vista, getting Dave Sidek of TV on the Radio to produce, and reportedly dabbling more in trip-hop and post-industrial music, as well as getting sober, well, certainly sound intriguing, and thus... Okay, look, if you go back to Hiss Spun, it's not as if Chelsea Wolfe didn't touch on more industrial sounds before, but there's definitely been a textural shift. The walls of buzzing distortion, crushing bass, shuddering vocal samples, where there's actually even a few palpable riffs and more developed percussion grooves this time, and especially that closer, clearer vocal placement, it's built to be a lot more immediate, and yet it's hard not to feel like that's a bit of a misstep. On records like Abyss and Hiss Spun, there was that crushing immensity, but also dimensionality and dynamic layers within that nightmare that rewarded a careful listen for those subtler details. Whereas here, there's bricked out compression and a lack of that greater dynamic range. It's more reminiscent of the darkest mainstream adjacent alt metal that could even possibly cross over. If Hiss Spun was Chelsea Wolfe's The Downward Spiral, this is her The Fragile. Now, on the one hand, if you're gonna go into trip-hop, I'm not sure how it's a good idea to get clunkier and less subtle, but on the other hand, it does not have to be a misstep, potentially giving the hooks and groove more direct punch that might help them stand out all the more, or amplify a really strong performance from Chelsea Wolfe. And honestly, I'm not hearing much of either. The vocals in particular. I went back to those earlier albums, even amidst the despairing, nightmarish production where she struggled to be heard or made out, there was a tangible struggle that drew in my emotional investment. Her vocals here are a lot more composed and prim, nowhere near as raw, where you can tell that she's reached the other side of whatever she went through, where there's just not that same intensity or fervor. She still has a very pretty, ethereal vocal tone, but when the more immediate mix will reward firepower, I'm just not as compelled by her choice of delivery here. It almost feels a bit detached. Now, in due fairness, that actually kind of makes sense when you look at lyrics and themes. Or notably, in exploring that hard process of getting sober and away from a bad relationship, it leads to arguably some of her most optimistic songs to date. Well, to a point. Intensely tempted to slip back into that miasma, self-aware of how it's been commodified in broad daylight by her, and maybe leaving the implication that a return might just wind up inevitable. But for now, progress forward. And I genuinely like how she places this in the context of her older work, composed under the influence, not to invalidate it, but to show the path of where it leads, both past and future. So necessarily the poetry might feel a little less gut-churning and descriptive, and yet I'm left with that similar sinking feeling after Birth of Violence, where it just doesn't feel as unique or distinctive. And pulling it all together, look, it's frustrating because it's very obvious this album's transitional. New label, new producer, better state of mind. It makes sense that her writing feels less impressionistic to fit less atmospheric production. But when you do this and the hooks and vocals don't pop as strongly to compensate, it feels like a misstep. And a front-loaded album really starts running together. Some good ideas literally blunted in the execution. And I thought some of this might be due to me hearing more abrasive, experimental music over the past couple of years, but then I went back to both Abyss and Hiss Spun, and if anything, I like them more than I did years ago. So for this, you know what, it is decent. Honestly, it might be a good jump-on point for folks who find her other work too bleak or difficult. I just really wanted to like this more. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, and subscribe. I know this might be contentious for diehard Chelsea Wolfe fans, but man, this is not doing it for me. At least not the way it is for a lot of the fan base. Again, Abyss, Hiss Spun, Apocalypsis, they just have a magnetism and texture that this doesn't really have. And I don't think it's entirely Chelsea Wolfe's fault, but I think it is exposing some of her flaws to go with this production. All I'm saying. Beyond that, though, make sure to leave your comments below if you think I'm wrong. Beyond that, if you guys want to help support the channel, argue with me more directly on Discord, or get albums onto my schedule going forward, link to my Patreon right over there. If you can't get into it, tough times, I understand. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.